At 6 p.m. here in Korea, good to have you with us. I'm Daniel Che for Arirang News. Thursday marks the one-year anniversary of the tragic sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry, and people around the nation will be holding special events in remembrance of the victims as the president herself checks every detail. In addition to being grilled over possible links to a recent bribery scandal, Prime Minister Yoo Seong-min also faced questions from lawmakers at the National Assembly about how he will tackle a rising youth unemployment rate and a plummeting birth rate. Korea's Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy decides it's time to take action to halt the downward spiral of Korean exports. Today, he introduced measures to counter that trend. Ahead of the first anniversary of the ferry disaster that killed more than 300 people, President Park Geun-hye was focused on making sure that everything is ready for a state memorial service for the victims. The president visited the event site in downtown Seoul on Wednesday to check on the preparations. She will also be briefed by officials on the progress of such issues as financial assistance to the victims' families. Seok-tae, who chairs a special investigative committee for the ferry disaster, called on President Park to decide whether to raise the ferry before she embarks on a four-nation tour to South America on Thursday. Saenuri Party floor leader Yoo Seong-min is set to attend a memorial service to be held on Jindo, a southwestern island close to the disaster site, today. Various religious gatherings are being held around Korea this week to mark the first anniversary of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, which claimed the lives of more than 300 people. A prayer service will be held at 7:30 p.m. on this Wednesday at Ansan Jail Church, closest to Danwon High School, which tragically lost so many of its students when the ferry sank. On Thursday, the anniversary of sinking, Buddhist temples will remember the victims when they start prayers at 10 a.m. Korea time. Near the accident site at Pengmokkang Harbor on Jindo Island, a mass will be held at 2 p.m. led by the Archbishop of Gwangju. Seoul's Myeongdong Cathedral will hold a special mass at 6 p.m. On the political front, ways to tackle unemployment and Korea's chronically low birth rate topped the agenda on the third day of a four-day interpellation session at the National Assembly on Wednesday. Our Kim Young-gil has more.
Lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party questioned government officials on whether the government has a plan for tackling the rising youth unemployment rate, which is nearly 3 times higher than the overall jobless rate. They also asked about plans to address Korea's worryingly low birth rate, as it's expected to start undermining economic growth soon.
Data from Statistics Korea shows that youth unemployment was over 11% in February, the highest figure in 15 years. What can you say about that?
The government is doing all it can to create new jobs by supporting President Park Geun-hye's Creative Economy Initiative and pushing for labor market reforms.
The lawmaker went on to point out that the number of newborns in Korea dropped to 430,000 last year, from 630,000 back in 2000, a loss to the economy of more than $200 billion. Meanwhile, lawmakers from the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy Party continue to demand that Prime Minister Lee Won-gu resign amid a snowballing corruption scandal involving a recently deceased businessman who claimed to have given a large sum of money to Lee a couple of years ago.
This is an unprecedented grave scandal. I would urge the Prime Minister to first step down and then comply with the prosecution's ongoing probe. What do you think about this?
I believe this scandal will have a large impact. I think the investigation will reveal this to be a very complicated case.
Lawmaker Chung Chung-lee, a member of the main opposition party's Supreme Council, said Wednesday that he will seek to impeach Prime Minister Lee if he refuses to resign. The embattled prime minister is accused of accepting some $27,000 from the recently deceased businessman Song Wan-jong while he was running for a National Assembly seat back in April 2013. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A special parliamentary committee says it's aiming to wrap up its proposal for reforming the nation's pension system for public sector workers by the end of the month. The committee says it will hear a law revision proposal prepared by a working group a week from today. The working group is comprised of government officials and public servants union members. Government officials have warned that if there are no reforms to the current system, the government will have to use $3.3 billion of taxpayer money to support the program every year. Earlier, the floor leaders of both political camps had agreed to pass the reform bill on May 6th, but the clash over an ongoing bribery scandal could delay those plans. North Korea is upping the stakes in its tussle with South Korea over workers' wages at their inter-Korean business park. It says that if its demand for a 5% pay raise is not met within the next few days, it's going to start applying a late payment fee, and that could start adding up very fast. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
North Korea stated that it will impose late fees on salaries payable to its workers at the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex if the South Korean government doesn't agree to its unilateral 5% wage hike by early next week. It says the fee has been set at 0.5% daily, or 15% per month, after the deadline passes. The latest ultimatum comes after Seoul said earlier this week that it will not be restrained by Pyongyang's timetable in resolving the wage hike issue. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry said on Wednesday that North Korea had unilaterally set sub-regulations regarding late wage payment fees in 2008 and levied the fees once in September 2010. The South Korean government has pointed out that while it prefers decision to be reached through dialogue, it has no realistic way of preventing Pyongyang from pushing ahead with this plan. The wage hike issue has snowballed into quite the controversy, since North Korea unilaterally decided in February to raise workers' wages by 5% to $74 a month starting in March. About 53,000 North Korean workers are employed by 124 South Korean companies at the Kaesong industrial complex. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
It's a historic day for the reclusive regime. Today marks what would have been 103rd birthday of North Korea's founding father, Kim Il-sung, and Kim Jongun commemorated the anniversary by paying his respects to his grandfather. The North's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Wednesday that the young leader was accompanied by senior military officials when he visited the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun at midnight. It said a basket of flowers in Kim's name was placed before the statues of his grandfather and father at the Memorial Hall. Dubbed the Day of the Sun, North Korea designated April 15th as a national holiday in 1997. The anniversary comes as the young leader is believed to have consolidated his power after a 3-year mourning period for his father, Kim Jong-il. Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Cho Taeyong has left for Washington, where he will attend a trilateral meeting with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts on Thursday for discussions on security in Northeast Asia. Before departing, Cho said he expects the talks to focus on North Korea and its nuclear program, though historical issues could also be discussed. The trilateral meeting also involves U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki. The first F-35 stealth fighter slated to be ready for combat this summer in the U.S. will not be able to outdo a set of 40-year-old attack jets that the Pentagon wants to retire. That's according to the U.S. Defense Department's chief weapons tester, Michael Gilmore. In a statement submitted to the House Armed Services Committee, Gilmore said those piloting the F-35Bs made by Lockheed Martin will not have the night vision capability that the A-10s do, and the jets will not best the A-10s in terms of the weapons they can carry. Korea is one of the countries set to replace its aging warplanes with F-35 fighter jets. As for the questions of the jet's capabilities versus its cost, a Korean government official noted that the jets to be delivered to Korea in 2018 are F-35As, which is a different variant of the F-35s. Researchers in Korea have found another piece of evidence that shows Dokdo Island is Korean territory. A 19th century Japanese government map shows the Korean peninsula, Ulleungdo Island, and Dokdo as Korean land, adding to the growing weight of evidence disproving Japan's claims to the Korea's easternmost island. Our Son Jung-in has more.
Researchers in Korea have discovered another piece of evidence disproving Japan's claims to Korea's Dokdo Island. A map from the Japanese Agriculture and Commerce Ministry from 1897 identifies both Dokdo and the neighboring Ulleungdo Island as Korean territory, with the island and the Korean peninsula all in white to show they're all part of the same nation. The map also refers to Dokdo by its Russian name instead of the Japanese name Takeshima.
If Dokdo were Japanese territory, wouldn't they use the Japanese name consistently?
The latest discovery adds to a mounting body of evidence debunking Japan's claims to the Korean island. Japan not only repeated the claim in its annual diplomatic blue book, but recently approved more middle school textbooks claiming Korea is illegally occupying Dokdo. Maps dating back to 1948 from a map compilation organization under the Japanese government do not include Dokdo as Japanese territory. Another map published by the Japanese Army General Staff Office in 1936 distinctly places Dokdo and Ulleungdo in Korean territory. An 1895 Japanese map book also shows Dokdo within the Korean borderline.
Japan keeps claiming that Dokdo is its territory, but it is a clear lie. This official map from the Japanese government makes us wonder if it can continue on with such claims.
Despite the clear evidence from the Japanese government itself, the Shinzo Abe administration remains adamant that Korea's Dokdo Island belongs to Japan. 손정인, Arirang News.
Let's move on to other stories. The latest jobs report has some less than rosy news for Korea. The unemployment rate has fallen slightly due to seasonal factors, and although new jobs were added, the increase was the lowest in 22 months. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The stumbling Korean economy added some 338,000 new jobs in March, raising the job creation rate from the previous year. However, the increase in new hires was the smallest since May of 2013. Statistics Korea said Wednesday the total number of employed people was more than 25 million in March, driven by hiring in the manufacturing and service sectors. The employment rate for people between the ages of 15 and 64 remained at 64.9%, unchanged from the previous month. The report also showed that the unemployment rate was at 4% in March. That's lower than the 4.6% recorded in February, but 0.1 percentage point higher than the previous year. The unemployment rate for young Koreans between the ages of 15 and 29 fell to 10.7% last month, down from the 11.1% tallied in February, the highest monthly figure since the data was first collected in 2000. It's slow going, but one expert says that the economy is showing signs of growth and employment will pick up soon. But the key here is that the growth rate on the hiring front is slowing.
The country is looking at long-term growth, so large companies are therefore reluctant to hire more new employees. That has a direct impact on the large number of educated young job seekers that are eyeing positions in large companies.
Experts say that structural measures to boost the economy will be more influential than new hiring policies, as such measures will help alleviate unemployment in the long run. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
More disappointing digits. The International Monetary Fund has slashed its 2015 economic growth outlook for Korea by 0.4 percentage points to 3.3%. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook report cited a drop in Korea's consumer and corporate sector growth expectations. The report says this is denting Korea's overall recovery momentum and could lead to less consumer spending and business investment, both of which are vital for growth. In its previous outlook released in January, the IMF had Korea growing 3.7%. The IMF's latest forecast is far below the Korean government's target of 3.8%, but it is still higher than the 3.1% projected by the Bank of Korea last week. China's economy grew at its slowest pace in 6 years during the first quarter of the year. According to China's National Bureau of Statistics, the country's GDP expanded by just 7% in the January to March period. This marked the country's lowest quarterly growth since the year 2009. When the global financial crisis saw China's growth drop to 6.6%. The Bureau attributed this slowdown to a decline in housing sales as well as a drop in global demand for Chinese products. Despite the slow growth, Beijing remained optimistic and said it will focus on maintaining a stable economy by strengthening the job market and improving efficiency. Korean exports, which have been the pillars of the nation's economy, have been on a downward trend since the start of the year. To stem the tide, the government has announced new measures to counter the decrease in outbound shipments. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
The government has unveiled a set of measures to help Korean companies boost exports in the face of slowing outbound shipments. Exports came to $133.6 billion in the first 3 months of the year, falling nearly 3% from the same period a year ago. The fall comes on the back of a sharp decline in global oil prices, which has led to a cut in the prices for petroleum and petrochemical products, the nation's main exports. The measures are aimed at shoring up small and mid-sized companies by tackling non-tariff barriers to trade in other markets, as well as further tapping into China's consumer goods markets and boosting electronic transactions.
There are companies that establish and manage online malls. We will help them expand into China by pairing them with small and medium-sized companies.
The government also plans to strengthen cooperation with e-commerce companies such as Alibaba, the largest such firm in China, by facilitating the registration of roughly 900 local products and approximately 100 local firms. The government is also seeking to help local firms promote their products in other promising regions, such as the U.S. and the Middle East, and provide customized support to firms targeting emerging markets. It will also set aside $40 billion worth of trade insurance for small and medium-sized companies. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
These are the stories we're following at this hour. More coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time, so do join us then. For now, thank you for watching.